So Devlog 3, it really doesn't feel like I've been working on this project nearly 2 months now, but it's true, I have. And unfortunately, during the past week, I've not really been recording these intersectional bits as I've been doing the work. So instead, you're going to get me in this current outfit describing what I've been doing, and maybe I'll do some voiceovers as well. To begin this week, I made sure that the client could load and unload chunks. While the server has been loading in chunks for a long time, the client has up until this point only been loading in chunk 00. I also needed to add functionality that made sure that other players were despawned when they left the chunk that the current player is in. They needed to be then loaded back in once they walked back into that chunk. At this point I realized I had a bug because chunks were generated as 100 tiles by 100 tiles. Unfortunately, both on the client and the server, this meant that there was no actual tile combining position 99 to position 100. Just a quick cat break for the old mental health, and then we continue. So this actually took me a really long time to figure out, at least a couple of days. It was a relatively quick fix of just adding an additional tile, but I will go back and fix this properly later on. Gonna switch to the iPad to explain this one just a little bit more. So we have a grid of where the player can be on the map, and that's decided as the player is in position 00, 01, 02, etc. Now, the issue comes that when we're drawing the terrain, we have a tile drawn as this point to this point, and it's made up of two triangles. The issue comes that while the player can be at any one of these positions, and they're actually drawn here, but as far as the server's concerned, they're right there. While the player can be in all these positions, the terrain draws the second chunk next to it here, but there's no tiles in this space between the two. The quick fix that I've done for now is that I've added an additional tile that overlaps that point. The player will never actually be in this extra single tile on a chunk, but it helps join up the chunks between chunk 0 and chunk 1. So with that fixed, we can see that the player is on the edge of a chunk here. It's still not perfectly lined up, but that's because the terrain is of different heights on the different sides. We'll fix that later. For now, all we need to do is click on this other chunk, and as we do so, the other player pops into existence, and then when we walk out of the chunk, the player pops out of existence. As a result, we only get told information about players that are in our current chunk, which is exactly what we want. The next task this week was to add walls to the terrain system. This would become important later on so that we could build buildings, but for now, the first thing that we want is to make sure that the player can't walk through them and that they can see them on the client. So I'm currently looking into how to handle line intersections. The reason being is that the chunks are storing any walls as a set of 2 points, and in order to figure out whether or not a player can walk through a certain area, we need to determine if there's a wall there. So I was struggling a little bit with how to do the collisions with the walls. I didn't really want to implement a collision system because it's going to have to be processed on the server, and right now the server isn't having to render anything at all. So the way I was thinking about doing it originally was I was going to do line intersections. Line intersection math turns out to be quite complicated and not something that I actually want to be doing. I was on a Discord server and I was having a conversation with a few other game devs, and they ended up pointing out that my world is essentially a pixel grid. And so, given that, I looked at how pixel lines are drawn in drawing programs. Turns out there's this lovely little algorithm called Bresenham, which does exactly what I need it to. It draws a line between 2 points on a pixel grid. So all I have to do is take that algorithm we implemented here, and then use that to get a list of the block's tiles. And all I need to do, when the player is trying to route a path to a location, all I have to do is filter out any of the paths that would go through that blocked tile. It's relatively straightforward, really efficient, and means that I'm not having to do complex maths every frame. So with Bresenham implemented into the server and a quick bit of rendering code, we can see that when we jump back into game, we have a wall here. And if we try and click on the other side of the wall, the player will path around the wall as opposed to walking directly through it. So once I added walls to the game, I realized that managing where these walls were placed from code was going to be really complicated. And it was about time that I built some tooling to manage the world of the ORPG. As much as I'd been putting it off, I needed a proper set of development tools. So we officially now have some tooling. It's only got one tool on it at the moment, which is the map editor, but if we load that up, you can see that it comes up with this relatively scary looking screen. Now don't worry, I'll explain what everything does, but the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to File, Open, and we're going to load in Chunk 00, which you actually just saw in the previous test. You can see that the list of walls is just a series of start and end points with an X and Y coordinate. So we can add another one of those really easily by just clicking Add New Wall, do start at 10:10, and then we want to finish it at 10:5, and we create a U shape rather than an L shape. Really simple. We then have a list of height brushes. Now I only have one brush set up now, but we can very easily create a new brush. Big boy. And then from there we can set the brush size to whatever we want. We can set the height that we want to modify it to, add a little bit of variation and noise, and then we can just paint that in like that. You can see the noise in there. And that's just a height map, so that sets the height of the terrain comparative to the world being set at 0. Once we have our chunk set up how we want, we set the position, in this case 00, and hit File, Save. So I won't lie, it took me a little bit longer to record all of the voiceovers and intersectional pieces than I was expecting. It's now Sunday, but I am really pleased with how much progress we made this week. With the new tooling, the bug fixes, the chunk loading on the client, it's all really important work. The walls are going to be a major bit of functionality as we build buildings and eventually add NPCs that will have their own pathfinding behavior. So I'm really pleased with it. If you'd like to keep up to date with how my progress goes building this game, then please subscribe to the YouTube channel. It really means a lot to me. And if you have any questions, leave a comment below and I will try and answer your questions. You know, I'm doing this not only to share my experience, but also to hopefully get other people interested in game development as well. And yeah, I will see you on the next devlog.